This is Belfast City Cemetery, and these are the beautifully restored Gallaher Steps. This area was closed due to antisocial behaviour for many years, but thanks to funding from, amongst others, the National Lottery, it is now open. They're called the Gallaher Steps. I'll mention the Gallaher family over to the left, and another prominent family from Belfast back in the day, the Harlands, as in Harlan the Wolf. So we'll go in then to the Gallahers at first. Tom Hartley, when he does his excellent tours here in City Cemetery, refers to this guy as the biggest serial killer of all time because he was known as the Tobacco King. In the corner of the Gallaher Steps then, you have a number of members of the Gallaher family. The first one is Thomas Hubert Gallaher, mentioned on the headstone as the infant son of Thomas Gallaher. And then it says Ballygoland, Greencastle. That's essentially nowadays where there's no trace of the house left. That's essentially around near where the current Abbey Centre is on the outskirts of Belfast. And you can see that perhaps that Thomas Jr., he died 1878, only aged 8.5 months. And then also Ruby, she died aged 21, 1886. And then her father, Thomas, came down to Belfast, did very well, founding Gallaher's tobacco factory. And Gallaher's only stopped producing locally relatively recently. Latterly, they were known as JTI. They were outside Ballymena. Thomas, he died in 1927, aged 87 years. And his wife, Robina Mitchell Gallaher, she died in 1930, aged 78 years. And also their second son, Thomas Victor, who's only 54, he died in 1933. Extremely wealthy family, made a lot of money. And one of the things that Thomas Gallaher did with his vast reserves of money was that he sponsored a ward in the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. The Royal Victoria Hospital was essentially the opening of it was the brainchild of another lady who's buried in this cemetery. Mentioned her previously on this channel, Viscountess Perry. Gallaher was certainly quite well involved and made generous donations to the opening of the Royal Victoria Hospital not far from here in 1906. This is one side of the Gallaher Steps. On the other side of the Gallaher Steps then is the final resting place of another successful, high-profile man from this area, Sir Edward James Harland. So it says in his headstone, in loving memory of Sir Edward James Harland, Bart, which stands for Baronet, sometime MP for North Belfast, who died 23rd December 1885, aged 64 years. He was actually born in Scarborough in Yorkshire, and he passed away in Glenfarne in County Leitrim. As it mentions on his headstone, he was a sometime MP for North Belfast, but he's best known these days for co-founding, along with Gustav Wolff. Again, we've featured Gustav Wolff previously on this channel, buried in Brompton Cemetery in London. Gustav Wolff, Edward Harland, then they founded the company Harland and Wolff. Of course, best known for its links with Titanic. And again, on this channel, we've featured a number of graves with connections to Titanic. This is where the man himself resides. He rests here. And also his wife, Rosa Matilda Harland. Again, like Lady Perry, who she was very involved, was Rosa Harland, Edward Harland's wife, in the opening of the Royal Victoria Hospital. And the Harlands themselves, they lived in a house which still exists to this day called Ormiston in East Belfast. And there are actually 3 people who lived in Ormiston, buried in this cemetery. The house itself was built for Coombe Barbers, who are a very wealthy linen spinning company on the outskirts of Lisburn. Then after the Coombes moved out, then the Harlands moved in, and then after they moved out, then the Perrys moved in. Another man who was living in Ormiston when he passed away, buried in this cemetery, is George Cumming, and he lived there when the Perrys were essentially based in London. A lot of the people here were the movers and shakers of the day. These are the only vaults here in City Cemetery, and as mentioned, been beautifully restored thanks to funding from the council and from the National Lottery. So again here, the Gallaher Steps at Belfast City Cemetery, beautifully restored. This is the place to be if you were a mover and shaker in Victorian Belfast.